Matter, service of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Cleveland. I'm Jean Martin. I'm the chair of the committee and the coordinator of today's forum. We have both remote and in-person audiences. Our topic today is end-of-life options in Ohio. Places like Oregon, Vermont, and Switzerland allow medical assistance in dying. But what about Ohio? Our speakers today will tell you. The speakers will present until about 9:30. Then we'll have about a half an hour of Q&A. Marlene and Jan will circulate with mics for the in-person audience. Please raise your hand if you're here and wait for the mics to come to you so that the people at home can hear you. And when you get the mic, speak clearly into it. For the virtual audiences, please use the Q&A box on your screen and we'll answer it, not the chat box, which we might miss. Also a note to virtual viewers, you can turn closed captioning on or off on your screen. Please be sure your phones are off or in airplane mode. This program is recorded and will be available in a few days on our website, uucleveland.org. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Vigil Schattinger is the founder and executive director of Ohio End-of-Life Options and Ohio End-of-Life Options Political Fund. Both are nonprofit organizations that provide education, raise awareness, and advocate for a medical aid in dying law. She joined the board of Death with Dignity National Center in 2016 and has attended national conferences on clinical and ethical matters surrounding medical aid in dying. She has presented about it in Ohio and nationally. Lisa worked as a women's health nurse practitioner and then became involved in caregiving for her grandmother at the end of her life. This helped her understand the importance of advanced care plans and exploring and discussing end-of-life issues. Anne Rowland was Assistant United States Attorney in the Northern District of Ohio for nearly 38 years. She served as the Deputy Chief of the Criminal Division and Chief of the Major Fraud and Corruption Unit. Anne specialized in the investigation and prosecution of public corruption, organized crime, and white-collar crime cases. She has served on the board of Ohio End-of-Life Options for 4 years and is chair of its Law and Policy Committee. Ladies, I give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Jean. On a personal note, it's really an honor to be back here in this room. I grew up in this church and had a lot of fun taking modern dance in this room and decorating Christmas trees. So this is bringing back fond memories. And my children did the same in this room. So I don't think I ever managed to be speaking on a topic like this in the future, but here I am. I wanted to start by giving you a little bit of background about Lisa and about me and how we got involved in this movement. As you heard, Lisa is a nurse, and she also grew up in Oregon, which was a state that pioneered the medical aid in dying laws that we have now in our country. Her beloved stepfather became ill with a terminal illness, and Lisa was heavily involved in his decision-making to use the Oregon law to end his life. And she was there for the family party that they had for him before he died, and was also present when he ingested the medication that ended his life at the time he wanted, in the way he wanted, and with the people around him that he wanted. She was so moved by the experience when she came back to Ohio, where she was living at the time. Forgive me. Do so. I think just a little bit of hair. That she started talking to her friends and colleagues about her experience and realized that in Ohio, nobody knew much about what was going on in Oregon or anything about medical aid and dying, and slowly came to the realization that she could make a contribution by starting an organization here in Ohio to promote discussion about this very important end-of-life option, medical aid and dying. And she has grown this organization in a very few years to a large number of supporters across the state, and has become, as you heard, a national expert serving on the National Board of Death with Dignity. So my introduction to concerns about medical aid and dying arose back in 2015 when my brother-in-law was diagnosed with glioblastoma, which some of you know is about the worst diagnosis you'd want to get. And he had no family of his own. So once he finished surgery and chemo and there was nothing more that could be done, he moved in with my husband and me. We were empty nesters by that time. And I had the honor of taking care of him in the last 6 months of his life. And everybody knew exactly how his end of life would go. Every physician we talked to, hospice care person we talked to, predicted accurately how it would go. And it was pretty awful. And it made me think that people should have a choice about whether they are required to go through that experience. I must say he did it very gracefully, and it was an education to me, but I do not want to have to go through that myself or any of my loved ones. So I started casting about whether there was an organization in Ohio that was thinking about this, and I found Lisa, and pretty quickly joined the effort. So on is our slide up? First one up? That slide before had a photo of Lisa's mother and stepfather on it, and this is a photo of my brother-in-law, John. Today, we are going to briefly discuss some of the standard ways that we have power at the end of our lives that you're probably pretty familiar with, starting with advanced directives. If I may ask, how many of you have advanced directives and living wills? Okay. We will skip over these slides.
Thank you all.
Yeah, yeah. Wish it was true of all of our audiences. So one thing we would like to talk about that is new, and I will skip a piece, is well, before I get to that, let me back up. In addition to the advanced directives, we'll also talk about a new dementia provision for advanced directives, palliative care and hospice care and how that interacts with medical aid and dying. And then Lisa will discuss medical aid and dying in more detail, what that involves, where it's available, residency requirements, and so forth. And she will conclude by talking about how we all can take action to try to move this issue forward in Ohio. Talking about death is not easy, and it's probably not the thing you want to do the first thing you get up on Sunday morning, but here we are. I think we've always been in charge of our own health care, and we should have the same power to make decisions of self-determination at the end of our lives and be able to take advantage of everything that medical science has to offer. The problem I think we sometimes have in talking about death is that we are afraid that it will upset our loved ones, that we will be forcing them to face the same fears, concerns, anxieties about death that we're feeling. And if you have not been able to have these conversations with your family, I encourage you to do so. I think it almost always goes better than you expect it will go. My parents were very open with me throughout my lifetime about what they wanted at the end of their lives. And I think first I probably kind of said, yeah. But as I got older and they got older, I viewed it as a real gift because I knew exactly what they wanted. It was my job as the executor to make sure that happened. And it was a lot easier to do that if I knew what I was doing, and they made sure I did. If you want some resources and how to start this conversation with your loved ones, whether you're the younger generation or the older generation, I'd refer you to a website called theconversationproject.org. And it's, on this slide, it's on the right-hand side. And you can go there and get tips on how to broach the topic at Thanksgiving dinner or on a phone call or on a walk or however it goes. One strategy I used with my children who were a little resistant to talking about it was to talk a lot to them about my experience taking care of my own parents. So I started with that, to say what was good about it, what was bad about it, what I wish had gone differently, to sort of take the pressure off them in the initial discussion, and then gradually went into the discussion of, this is what I want. And I also wrote it down, if they can find it. All right. So where were we, Lisa? Advanced directives, I think we can go through those. There has been a change in 2019 on the DNR form, if you're not recently familiar. There are now 2 DNR choices you can make. I don't know if people are familiar with this yet, but you might want to take a look and see whether you want, if you're in the situation where you're going to do a DNR, there are 2 choices you can make. One is you can have a DNR with comfort care after a cardiac arrest. So the DNR would not take effect until you had a cardiac arrest. And then you can have a DNR CC, which would take effect immediately. So the difference between the 2 is when you want it to trigger the DNR. So
do not attempt to resuscitate, just making sure everybody knows that.
Yeah, right. All right. The new provision in advanced directives that's being talked about now is the Alzheimer's dementia provision. Obviously, we all worry about the fact that we might develop dementia and we might not be in a position to be confident enough to make decisions about how we want to be treated if we have dementia. So back in 2019, when I redid my estate documents, I had heard about this. It was very new then. My attorney had never heard of it, but we drafted one and I have it. So that's the good news. The bad news is that it's not legal in Ohio. It's not enforceable in Ohio. But I thought it would be a good way, if it was in my papers when I died, for my family to just understand one more time how I felt about the level of medical care I wanted if I developed dementia. And so if you go to our website, ohiooptions.org, you can get more information about this. But basically what this does is it's kind of a grid. They have 3 levels of dementia: mild, moderate, and severe. And then they have various levels of healthcare you can get. And you just, it's like a Chinese menu, you just mix and match. If you have mild dementia, you might want more care. If you're still recognizing your relatives and reading and so forth and have a life that you're enjoying, you would want to be treated even, for minor problems. But as your dementia advances, you might want to reduce the amount of care that you got. You might not want to have any supplemental feeding, for example. And so it's a nice tool, I think, for talking to your families and friends. Whether or not any court would ever enforce it, so far we don't know. All right. Talked about the DNR.
Yep, I think that's on to me.
Okay, Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So thank you, Anne. Let me just start by saying that while they talk about me and what I've done, as you know, with any group, I would have gone nowhere without the group that has met me at my table because they care so much about this. We're so thankful for Anne. You've met our Director of Outreach, Molly McMahon Graziano, in the back, and she has moved us forward in ways that we just never would have gotten to. So thank you to everyone who's helped us. I want to let you know that many people in this room have advanced directives. We do have a packet that includes all of the things we talked about. We have 6 of them because we didn't want to print many of them. And you can also scan a QR code back there and go to our website to get all of these different pieces if you'd like to download them. And then we will also I'll talk about our learning series later, but we'll be having detailed learning series, talking to experts in talking about each of these things in sessions to come through our group. So what I want to do is turn to, those are the types of decisions you can make ahead of time while you're competent to make decisions. The part that's also so incredibly important is selecting a healthcare proxy, healthcare durable power of attorney who understands, respects your wishes, and is willing to work for them, because this can be hard over time. And so that's a really important part of this. And actually, the Conversation Project has some excellent information on how to make the decision on who that is. Perhaps a family member isn't the best person to be that, held that role. So, but then we're going to talk about the type of care you can be getting. And what I am constantly run against is the misunderstanding about or lack of knowledge about what palliative care is and how hospice plays into that. I am not a hospice provider. I have such incredible respect for people who are in that world. Palliative care is the general term for symptom management for those who have a serious illness. We used to kind of talk about chronic illnesses. That terminology has changed to serious illness, but it's improving the quality of life for people who have serious illnesses. That can transition for people to getting into end of life care. Palliative care allows a person to also be getting curative treatment for whatever their serious illness is. So once they kind of transition into end of life care, then a decision can be made to determine, one, if a physician believes that they have 6 months or less to live, and they make the decision that they no longer want curative treatment. So there's a big stigma about all of this, as we know. So many people are just afraid of the whole thing. I can't tell you the times that I've heard people say, well, they just gave up and went into hospice, rather than respecting that, we reach the end of our life, every one of us. And so how do we turn our vision to our goals for living a quality life at the end of our lives? And I think hospice and palliative care help us understand the trajectory of our illnesses and hopefully work toward making those decisions in a way that improves the end of our life, rather than just being chaotic and managing symptoms and all of that. There's a big concern to me too that people make these decisions at the last minute. We see this again and again, that hospice care is underutilized. People jump into it and with 72 hours to live. Of course, none of us know how long we have to live, but and so then it just becomes a sort of a chaotic process, even though they're working as best as they can. But It's important to know that hospice care, if you have Medicare, Medicare pays for hospice. They provide hospital beds and things that you need in your home for that. They guide you they prescribe medication, physicians provide medications, and nurses guide you on that. What's important that people don't always know is that they do not provide round-the-clock care in your home. So the family at home or the loved ones at home manage that process. And that can be a surprise to people. People think you're in hospice care and they're taking over. In fact, they're providing goods and services to help you manage that process. They do have possibly in-house hospice facilities that people can go for respite care, and sometimes hospitals have beds or areas designated for hospice care. But primarily it's wherever the person calls home. So again, it's understanding that process. I find too that people simply don't know when it's appropriate to make this move, and they think that perhaps their healthcare provider is going to say, hey, I think it's time. I think I can see that maybe you don't have a lot of time left. Please consider hospice care. And so people will call me and say, this is what's happening. Who makes this call? And I say, well, perhaps it's time for you to call this for the hospice facilities for your loved ones to start asking questions and start the process. The physician does need to refer and certify that the person has 6 months or less to live, but anyone can start that process of making the phone call. And we have on our resources tab a tab for hospice care, because we encourage you to ask questions of hospice providers. We're in an area with lots of good hospice care, but ask questions of them to find out which of those providers provide the care that matches your needs. So please think about this ahead of time is the takeaway, I think. So this is another option for people who want to intentionally make a decision that they don't want a prolonged dying process. Voluntarily stopping eating and drinking is different from what happens naturally when you're in the active dying process, where our bodies just don't want food and fluid. This is someone who is may have a terminal or life-limiting disease, who decide to stop eating and drinking. There's research that's happening more often now, showing that this time frame is approximately 7 to 14 days. It just so happens that my own grandfather opted for this. He lived in Arizona. He was 94 years old. And my mother came for her visit. She visited him regularly, and he said to her, Janet, I'm done. I know that the things that are wrong with me are not getting better. And I am going to stop eating and drinking. She had never heard this before. It was tough to think through, but he was determined. People who make these types of decisions are often quite determined. And so while loved ones may be surprised or shocked or not happy about the decisions, eventually through conversations, we find that a lot of times they come to support. I guess that's another point in this whole issue, is that in talking with our families, there can be conflict. And so sometimes those conflicts are never resolved. But in hoping that we start them earlier, we'll at least be prepared for how to really express our wishes as far as this is what I want. And I hope that you'll support me in those wishes. So this is an option. We honestly do not know how well supported it is in Ohio. There's not research here. But we do really strongly believe that you should have medical care for this. At some point in the process, if you're going down several days and you're no longer eating or drinking, you should be able to qualify for hospice care. And we strongly recommend that happens. This is a really great resource. And again, if you want a copy of these slides, please email us. We'll give you that address. And there are two great books, at least that we know about, talking about the VSED handbook is really aimed at caregivers and loved ones helping someone through this process. And the one on the right is really great, an academic, more academically focused study, but really by very experienced caregivers, healthcare providers in this world. So what I find is that, I have talked to other people who've supported their loved ones through VSED, and what I find is that it can be a peaceful process for the person who makes the decision and completes it. I find that the people who supported them through it have a very hard time with it. It's a tough process. And quite honestly, those are the people who land at our table, because they say, why did they have to go through this process, when if they had lived in Oregon or California or some of these other states, they could have made the decision while they, that you have to be competent to make the decision, but they could have made that decision and died peacefully at the time and place of their choosing. So as a discussion, I don't think this is going away. And one of the things that kind of was surprising to me was that AARP had never discussed this, never took a stance. And then in 2022, they actually included it in this end of life survey, the study that they did. And what they found was that people really are of a certain age are not really afraid of dying, but they really do want some say in how they die. So I think they said that 69% of the survey respondents supported medical aid in dying, which is not surprising to us. When we did a survey, or there was a survey completed of Ohio voters in 2018, that same number of people supported that concept here in Ohio. So what you need to know is that medical aid in dying is not legal in Ohio. What it is a law that allows a terminally ill, mentally competent adult to request and self-administer. They must ingest the medication on their own when facing their imminent death. So it's a strict voluntary process. Only that person may make the request, may go through the steps to qualify, and then only they may decide if or when to take the medication. They may change their mind at any point in this process. And again, it's this concept of a person understanding that they are dying. And a lot of, I've ran into a lot of people who said, my loved one just never knew that they were dying. We were all shocked. So it's an interesting distinction. They must be an adult. In the United States, you must be an adult. 2 healthcare providers, and that varies by state who the providers can be, must confirm that you have 6 months or less to live, which are the same criteria that are used to qualify for hospice care. You must be mentally capable of making the decision throughout the process. There are safeguards that are involved: 2 different oral requests that have to be documented in your chart, a separate written request that has a couple of witnesses, one of whom may not benefit from your death, and then you must be able to self-ingest the medication. It's really important to know that physicians, pharmacists, anyone involved in care can opt out of this. And what we find is that in states with these laws, healthcare systems make that policy. So for example, Catholic healthcare systems do not participate. One of the things that we're trying to ensure is that those policies are, first of all, policies that are written and that they are transparent about it, that they're posted, so that somebody who assumes that their physician will participate in this can go to that person and start the process in a seamless fashion, rather than finding that they don't participate and then having to find another provider. The physician must actually talk to you about what care you can get at the end of your life. Again, we don't talk a lot about death and dying, and so people simply don't know what care can I receive: comfort care, pain management, spiritual guidance, all of those important pieces of care. It's very important. I know that so many are concerned. Those with concerns about dementia or Alzheimer's are not eligible for this, because by the time they reach the terminal portion of that disease, they're no longer capable of making the decision. You may not write this into an advance directive. So that's why it's kind of helpful to have the information about an advance directive guided or aimed at dementia. That's the way we have to work, people who are concerned about that. And advanced age or disability alone are not qualifiers. So you really have to have a terminal illness and a diagnosis of that to qualify. So what's happening around the United States? This is a complicated map. Let me quickly say, states in green have laws. States in blue are not even aren't considering it recently in the last year or so. States in dark orange are states now that still have some form of active bill that they're considering. Light orange states are states that proposed legislation this year, but it has died so far. States in red are kind of a newer concept where they are actively trying to prevent their state from having access to this. Guess where we lie in that whole world. So what we want to do is change Ohio from a blue state to an orange state, preferably a green state, but certainly not a red state. So the other important thing to do is to understand is that Oregon and Washington in the last couple of years have removed their residency requirements. All these other states, you should be a state resident in order to qualify. So Ohioans may now go to Oregon or Vermont, go through the steps of qualifying. If they qualify, get the medication, we advise you not to return to Ohio to ingest the medication. That is because we do have a law here saying that it's a third-degree felony to assist in a suicide. And so you could possibly put your loved ones in legal jeopardy. So that's something to think about, and why we think that it's important to carve out the ability to go through this process at home. I spoke to a gentleman the other day who said, I don't want to die in Oregon. I have no desire to die in Vermont. So let's make this happen here. I'm personally okay with Oregon, but you know. So what does this look like? Who is your someone? Why are you here today? What does this mean to you or to your loved one? To my loved one, Jack, first of all, my mother here, and Jack is in the blue vest there, and my mother's next to him. I'm in the back peeking out there. This was his end of life celebration. It just so happened that his birthday was in October, and he brought people together and talked about his wishes and had amazing conversations. And he was so clear that he was so thankful to live in Oregon. He was a retired neurologist. He knew what the path ahead of him looked like with his disease. And he just felt a tremendous sense of comfort knowing that he qualified for those medications and that it was up to him to decide if he then wanted to take them. Again, he had that concept of knowing he was dying. And so closure was important to him. He did all of those steps in different parts of his world to have closure. And again, I cannot say enough that this is an option in addition to quality end-of-life care provided through hospice. It's not an either or. We find that in states with laws, the vast majority of people who choose this also are enrolled in hospice care. So it's not an either or, another form of care. So what are we saying to you? We're saying, please get informed on this and start talking about it. I think we're at a moment in the world where we know that if we don't take action, things are not going to happen. So please become informed about this. Start asking your candidates how they feel about them. And if they don't know about it, inform them. We don't want to talk about death and dying. And so talking to a candidate and saying, hey, what do you think about somebody who's terminally ill being able to make the decision to decide what their when and what their last day looks like is not easy. So let us help you prepare for that. But it's so important to get ready for this. Talking to your Ohio state legislators, and you have to go to ohiolegislature.gov to find that person because we know that redistricting maps have changed. And so let your current Ohio state legislators know that you support this and you would like them to support it. We are not naive to the political landscape in Ohio at the moment. However, it doesn't mean that they can't learn about this. I take my guidance from the woman who helped pass the law in Maine to say, I will never say that be able to say that a legislator has never heard of this. They have to all know about it. And then we can figure out how to move forward with it. Personally, myself, I will say, I hope you all know about citizens, not politicians, and the efforts to for the constitutional amendment, ending gerrymandering. That's so incredibly important, and it really gives us a window for when those changes occur to get ready to have an informed community of support amongst different groups throughout Ohio who are informed and ready to take a stance on this. So please join us if in ways that work for you. Follow us on social media. Again, we will speak to any group. We will speak to book clubs, or we will speak to, I'm going to be speaking at the Bioethics Network of Ohio conference in April. We will talk to anyone. Please sign our petition of support on our website. That's just a way for us to gather information and when we do meet with your legislators, let them know that you care. And again, if you want a copy of this, please email us and sign up for our newsletter. We've got a learning series coming up, and then you can scan the QR code if you want a copy of the advanced directives. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for this. Discussion and a difficult topic. I'll now turn the mics over to Jan and Marlene. Remember to speak into the mic when you're asking your question so everyone can hear, including at home.
Thank you. I'm curious. I'm curious to know how to pass the law in Ohio and where the opposition is coming from, and then what organizations, churches can do about it.
That is the question we need. So there's 3 or 4 parts to that. Yeah, Anne, you can start and I'll follow.
Well, first of all, your national organization, the UUA, have made a contribution. They endorsed this law very early on, I think at the time Oregon was passing its law, so that's good. What we have done, we have a political fund, as well as we have a C4 as well as the C3. And so under the C4, we're allowed to spend money on lobbying, and we have retained a lobbying organization. And over the last year or so, we have been approaching Republicans on the theory that most Democrats would support us, but we need to find a Republican who would support the legislation. And that has been a tough battle. Even the moderate Republicans seem to be a little reluctant to.
Why is that?
Because they're afraid that the people who control the Republican Party in Ohio would primary them. I think it's the problem. So that's why Lisa mentioned the gerrymandering, that it's a real tough problem in Ohio.
So the Republican platform does not support this. Ohio has a super majority of Republican control. So even though I have to make it very clear, this is a human issue, not a partisan issue. So when we sit down with our legislators, no matter their party, we can connect with them on a personal level and they can understand it. The political process stops them. So we have to be laying the groundwork. Sorry, Anne, I totally jumped in, but we have to be laying the groundwork of talking to people to help understand these laws. A lot of things, a lot of the problems too are that the words used purposefully by opponents, and opponents historically have been the religious right and the Catholic Conference, who use words like assisted suicide or euthanasia that are just scary, and they're controversial. So why would somebody want to jump into that fray? Rather than saying, this is me facing the end of my life and wanting to make a decision for myself. So I think, so that's some of the questions. So the other option we would have is to have a ballot initiative or a constitutional amendment. And those are possible, but expensive. We've just seen that process, right? Right. So, you know, if somebody wants to drop some seed money in our lap, we know how to use it. But in the meantime, we have to set up a ways in Ohio so that bigger organizations can help join us. The coalitions of support are just incredibly important. Sorry.
And as to the coalitions of support, we're taking kind of two tracks at one time. With our 501c3, we're trying to educate people in Ohio about what medical aid in dying is doing in other states and how it's helping people. And my hope is that more and more people, as they learn about this option, will be going to their own doctors and saying, why do I have to go out of state to get something that I deserve now here in Ohio? And so elevate the discussion within the medical community. We hope we can get a bill introduced at some point, you know, with the legislature constituted the way it is now. It's unlikely it would go too far, but if we can get a bill introduced as Lisa accomplished in 2018, that will generate a lot of publicity on the issue and perhaps get voters fired up about it. So we just keep trudging away, knowing that this is a marathon in Ohio and not a sprint.
But it's an opportunity to prepare.
Yeah.
And what we're doing is we're also being guided by the states that have laws. How are these, you know, laws evolving? Standards of care, how are they evolving so that we know the best case scenario for our law, for our bill, and the healthcare that will follow. Our goal is to become an organization that helps with implementation. This is the hard work, but the real work begins when we get a law and then can help providers understand how it works. And in states with laws, what we find is that the legislators who really jump into it to become champions are the ones with personal experiences. Right now, we're really watching New Hampshire. In the next week, they're having a very important vote, and they have bipartisan support, bipartisan sponsors. That's incredibly important for us to be able to say, hey, legislators in Ohio who support this, you can talk to these people in Maine who also have bipartisan support, and New Hampshire. New Hampshire would be incredibly important because Vermont and Maine both have laws. And so based on the experiences with their neighbors, they have had testimony by providers saying we should have this in New Hampshire as well.
I came here from California, and when they passed the law, I came here from California, and when they passed the law, it closed down. It was a 10-year window, and it meant an easier pill to swallow to get. And right when I was leaving the last 2 years ago, we were working on trying to make it be a permanent law. I mean, are you guys doing a temporary?
We don't have plans to have a sunset clause. And I think their clause is now, I think I just read it, like 2031 or 34 or something like that. So they kicked that can down the road. And I imagine they'll work on getting rid of it, hopefully.
Why wouldn't you do it?
Why wouldn't we have a sunset clause? I think based on the experience in the states that have laws, there's no reason for it. We know that the laws work effectively as written. Again, but that's part of the political process. Right. If your sponsor just insists on that, perhaps that's something that you can wiggle on. So I think being knowledgeable about the different provisions within the laws and what's going to work best, that's part of the states' rights issues is that each state looks at legislation and makes it work within their state. So our job is to know the best practices in each of the states so that we can work with that person who's sponsored.
I think we have a real advantage because Oregon law has been in effect for 27 years. And they collect data on who's using the law. And there's no reported instances of abuse or problems. And that's a pretty good number of years of experience to say to an Ohio legislator, we don't need a sunset provision. You know, it's worked for 27 years, and now we have California and New Jersey and bigger states. 20% of Americans have access to medical aid in dying now. So,
And what I find is that people now are coming to our table because they do have an experience like mine. When I started talking about this, I was very unique. And thankfully, I am not as much anymore because people have loved ones who live in California, Colorado, you know, wherever Vermont may be. One of the stories that I tell that is continually frustrating to me is that two people who lived in, I believe, Shaker Heights, left to help pass laws in other states, one in Colorado and one in Vermont. And why are we doing that? Let's stay here and work toward change. That seems to be a thing. So, and that's from somebody who's, you know, originally from Oregon, but I've been here, you know, since 1997. So let's work here. I'm not pretending it's easy, but it's important. And, you know, waking up tomorrow and knowing that even though I'm not making this decision, there is somebody else in Ohio who is not able to make this decision is what keeps us coming to the table.
I have a question from a home viewer. What about someone with Alzheimer's who doesn't want a slow decline? Is the only option traveling to Switzerland?
At this point, yeah, they have to manage that through healthcare decisions, through things like advanced directives. Correct. This nowhere in the United States someone who is not capable of making decisions able to use this law, and they must also be considered terminally ill. So that is not changing. That is not something that I think states will start including. People do travel to Switzerland, and that's also an onerous and expensive process. So those are decisions that people have to research and decide if they want to do.
I'm Jim Rich. I'm 88, 86 years old, and I feel that I'm terminally ill. I am dying. We're all dying. But when am I considered terminally ill legally? Take advantage of certain laws and certain programs.
So there are clinical criteria that are used to evaluate a person when they are certified as eligible for hospice care. And so one of the, I think an important evolution in one of the laws is New Mexico really has kind of the gold standard for laws right now. And they say that if you are already enrolled in hospice care, then you only need one other provider to verify that you're terminally ill and mentally competent. So there are clinical criteria that they use that are used to evaluate whether one is considered terminally ill. I'm not a hospice provider, so I can't go into that, but it's a clinical decision that's made. It's not easy, and you know, we know that people can live longer than 6 months, even if they're enrolled in hospice care. And that's important. That's fine. But to the best of their knowledge, using the clinical criteria they're evaluating with, then they make that decision. Can't give you specific necessarily.
I just want to say two things. One is the importance of reading both of those books that you mentioned, the handbook and the other one. They're very, very informative and helpful in terms of detail that we don't have time to discuss today.
Correct.
The other thing I just want to mention is in terms of the termination of life and so forth, it hasn't always been this legal and this complicated. My grandmother, for example, had a child that was not good, and the child did not thrive, and everyone knew it was going to be a burden to the family, and so the country doctor monitored it and then came and visited the baby, and then the baby died six hours later. So there was this kind of, let's look at the family and their resources back in the day when we were much more of a rural society. So now it's complicated, it's legal, it's very different from what it used to be. But it used to be people kind of took things in their own hand, including the doctors, that were not discussed openly, but everyone kind of knew about it.
So I think that it's an interesting concept. I think that that's one of the reasons, though, that people decided they wanted to codify policies, because they actually did want parameters for that. And that's also one of the reasons we're very carefully saying that this is an adult who is making a decision for themselves. That's really important in America. You know, things have changed. The medical world is able to save people, and for a very long time. And so there has become more of a discussion of what's important, quality of life versus quantity of life. You know, I'm going to say the name out loud of Jack Kevorkian, because some people feel that he did amazing work, and some people think he was an absolute ghoul. And one of the things that he did do was make this a very open process to understand that people wanted this and physicians were willing to provide it. So what we also needed, though, were policies. You know, we needed to codify the process so that it was, everybody understood, society understood how that process worked. And so that's how we landed at how these laws work now and safeguards involved in them. One more
Another
question.
question from home. If physicians can't assist, where do you get the medication?
I can't answer that because I'm sorry, I talk about the legal process. Yeah, so I'm sorry, that's not, I'm a rule follower and I'm working toward a law. There you go.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for an excellent outline. I just want to point out a news article very briefly in the Plain Dealer about within 4 weeks ago. A past Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Rutte, and his wife, they were 93, both of them. Very poor health, but very prominent people, obviously. And they went through the process of a combined euthanasia record spot. It doesn't help you here at this point. At the same time, there are communities where this is broadly accepted. So
Yes, other countries.
And I think that the media is really doing a much better job uncovering euthanasia in Europe and medical aid in dying in this country, which I'm maybe naively thinking will help the cause. There's something in the Washington Post or the New York Times almost every month, I think, on this question. And with so many states pursuing bills, I think up to 20 states were working on bills this year. That generates a lot of news coverage also. And the more this is in the public eye, the better.
And we do have to say we differentiate in America that euthanasia is legal nowhere. As you may know, Canada allows people to choose if their physician gives them an injection or not. We do not do that anywhere in America. That was part of the original ways the laws were written. And at that point, again, being the first law to ever pass, it was found that self-ingestion was the kind of the final way to prove that this was voluntary in nature. And so every law since then has gone along that legal precedence. And I do think that there was an instance in Oregon that I know of. There's a short movie about a couple who were both qualified for the law and did take it at the same time. So it's kind of a romantic concept, but I always kind of am careful with that. I don't want to over romanticize this. This is still really difficult stuff. But, you know, the more we can talk about it, hopefully at least we can understand it and respect people's wishes.
Thank you for the talk. What if somebody still has a certain number of months to live? They're not at death's door yet, though they will be within a year. But they're in such intense physical pain continually that they just can't take it anymore. Any dispensation for these poor souls?
Pain has not been one that has changed, made a change in the law. I understand that, you know, we hear that as an issue a lot, and it's so far that's not in America. It's whether you're terminally ill is the only designation.
And you would have a VSED option.
They have the option of voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, you know, which is it's an option, and it is important to do the research on it. But no, we don't have medical aid in dying for that. Chris, here.
We have time for one or two more questions. No more questions, nothing from the home.
I don't want to make a question, but I'd like to just, I can talk about, I don't know, somebody's not going through, but it looks to me like, I can't believe this, so that if, from what I found out about death with dignity, I'd really have to have terminal illness of cancer. I'll tell about my wife in a minute, and then go to Oregon or Washington to die, because it looks like chances in Ohio. But my wife passed away of dementia over a period of time. And what I found is you need to have a relationship with your physician. And then there's out of the hospice to the Western Reserve, there's a navigator program that worked with us with palliative care nurses. So, and I had a relationship with my physician. So, and Lee was able to die at home, no COVID. And it was, in a way, I was very, looking back, thankful. But I think you need the relationship with your physician, most of all. And then if you find, you talked about having a proxy, which is another thing that interests me, and I think we need, but I think that avenue, if you're alone or family, works. And we really almost had like another member of the family who was the palliative care nurse. And we went just quickly on hospice only for a week.
Wow.
And what happened is I couldn't relate. At that time, I was the patient. I couldn't relate to the hospice nurse. And we had gone on this path at that time. So I went back to the navigator program. We had another nurse who kind of pushed us to the end. So I'm
It's an important,
grateful. I'm grateful for all the things you're doing, and maybe eventually, as all of us get older and doctors become more aware of the dying process, we will get a law where a person then can make that decision. Thanks for letting me share my story.
You're welcome. And just quickly, some of the diagnoses, you know, cancer is certainly a majority of people who use the law, but there's also heart disease, lung disease, some neurological diseases as well.
We have one more question from home that I think has sort of been answered. The question is, can we do something similar to what we did for abortion last November on a ballot issue? You mentioned the cost already.
Yeah, so that was a constitutional amendment, and you have to gather over 400,000 signatures throughout Ohio in a short period of time. And what that means is, for constitutional amendments, what that means is that you end up hiring professional signature gatherers in addition to using any volunteers who are willing to help. And that is expensive. I think we have heard about $8 per signature. So that price tag moves up quickly. If we do just create a law through voting initiated statute, that's over 100,000 signatures, so it's less. You still need a very coordinated effort. So that's why it's important for this coalition building to have different organizations also be invested in the process. And then that statute could be in jeopardy depending on how the legislature decides to act on it. So yes, it's possible, and we are happy to go any of those routes. So again, we're looking for seed money, so.
I think that's all the time we have for questions.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you to speakers, to mic handlers, to tech people, and to audience members for a great program this morning. We follow our first and third Sunday schedule, so our next gathering will be April 7th at 9 a.m. to discuss immigrants, burden, question mark, blessing, question mark, or duty, question mark. The speakers will be James Nichols, staff attorney, Migration and Refugee Services, Cleveland Catholic Charities, and Dana Beveridge, associate attorney, Costas Network Law Center. If you'd like to receive reminders of our forums, fill out the form on the clipboard that's either being circulated or is on the background table. And be sure to stop by the table for more literature products that Lisa has brought for the Cleveland Memorial Society. You're welcome to attend our 10:15 a.m. service, either upstairs in the sanctuary or on our YouTube page. The theme today is Senior Sunday, one of my favorites. Our high school seniors will reflect on what UUC can mean to them and what they have meant to UUCC. Karen Tooley, pianist extraordinaire, will be playing on the piano. To see what's happening in our congregation, check out the website at uucleveland.org. Thanks again for joining us, and have a safe and happy Patty's Day. And if you haven't already voted in early voting, don't forget to vote on Tuesday. One more thing I want to say that I have not told the speakers, we have a collection plate each week, and in recent years, we've been donating it to a nonprofit organization. And if your organization has been selected, it will be, I thought it would be today, but because of Senior Sunday, they chose their own, and they're not picking them back that.
Not yet.
So it'll be in a couple of weeks.
Oh, thank you. That's really lovely and
Have a
meaningful.
great
Thank you.
weekend.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again.
Senior Sunday could mean somehow.